Well, thank you very much, Chairman. And it's a great honor for me to be here. And my co-author of this particular presentation, Dr. Jiming Wang, is also on the audience. And so he can always jump in and to provide any additional points after my presentation if needed. And the topic which I'm going to cover today and speak on is certainly related to the tremendous transformation which has been recently occurring in China and in the agriculture in general. But in particular, I think hog industry certainly is a particularly good showcase for that. And so I'd like to use the hog farming in China to illustrate some of the key transformation which has happening in China. And let me start with the notion which we do not necessarily talk about often, and we always talk about food security. But however, in China, the pork security somehow is a very important issues. And when China talk about food security, really, they talk about largely rice and pork. So traditionally has been for quite a long, pork and rice have been considered stabilizer for the countries. And the politicians particularly believe as long as you have control on the pork, as long as you have control on the rice, that means you provide adequate quantity in the people's dinner table, then you are safe as the authorities and so on. So that's how important the pork and the rice is. Today, of course, I'm going to talk about the pork. China is the world's largest hog producer and also the pork consumer. And for the policymaker, the policy goals are quite straightforward, but yet very complex to achieve. That is, they want to have a sufficient pork supply. At the same time, they want to have the cheap pork on the dinner tables for their citizens. And one of the recent national concern, which occurred in China, but also occurred in the other developing countries as well, is the rapidly rising pork price, which has become the #1 policy concerns in recent years in China. And this is the table. Because of the time constraint, I don't think I will go into the detail, but if you look at the last column there, that largely tells you the percentage of China in terms of the world swine production, in the pork production and pork consumption and the imports and exports. Obviously, China is not a big player yet in the trade areas, but very big players in terms of consumption and as a productions. And my number on the total head of the hogs is slightly different from the previous presenters, maybe slightly different definition, that's possibilities. But roughly in China, and we have about 1.3 billion peoples, and you have 660 million hogs. So 2 people share 1 pig roughly per year. And this is a picture how the hog production and pork production over the time. And the biggest change in China was occurred in 1978. So this is the starting year for this particular figures. And if you look at particularly the green line over there, this is the number of the slaughtered hog over time from 1978 to 2010. And overall, you see quite a rapid increase on the numbers of hog, of course, together with the pork productions. And we can divide this into probably roughly four major periods. And one period, what we call the reform period, during 1978 to 1984. That's basically the milestone of that is adoption so-called farm household responsibility system. That's basically moved away from collective farming to the household-based farmings. And then we moved to the more what we call the expansionary period. This is covered roughly from 1985 to 1997, and which is basically can be categorized as the liberalization of a domestic marketing system. During those two periods, as you can see, the number of the pig slaughter has been increased much faster than the recent years, even though we do observe the continuous growth, but the growth rate in the latter period has been slowed down a little bit. So in the third period, we call that structural adjustment period. This is relatively, we observe that production has been shifted from the pure expansion to the improvement of the quality and more emphasis on the production efficiencies. And this is probably roughly from 1997 to 2006. Then we move to the more recent period, what we call the industrialization period, from 2007. And we saw two basic major trends during this particular area. One is certainly rapid industrialization of pig farming, and same time we observed soaring price in the pork, which, as I mentioned earlier, has become the national concerns. And we look at some numbers. Certainly, we look at some number on the hog production related to the production cost. And we see the tremendous increase of cost of producing hogs in China. And there are three major cost components: feed, and the labor, and the feeder's pig. And certainly, we can say that the increasing costs on the feed and the labor probably are largely or mainly responsible for the rising cost. This is how the cost for the hog price in China and in the United States. And we can say from probably roughly after 2007, and this is the red line, which represents the hog price in China. And the bluish lines represent the price in the United States. So as you can see, this reflects the fundamental change in the production, in terms of structure of hog production in China. So not surprisingly, China becomes a net importer of pork recently. And now, gradually, it's even become a concern because people are worried about whether that's going to threaten the domestic hog producers because the much cheaper pork from United States, Canada, and so on. And the pork price are now, as the market has been liberalized since 1996, and the researcher, policymaker tended to observe these typical cyclical behaviors of pork price in China. And this is a picture which showed that. And typically we use the hog-corn price ratio to describe the situation. And we observed roughly 3 to 4 years typical hog cycles in China. And the hog-corn price ratio fractured around roughly 6 versus 1 ratios as a normal type of range. And we all know this is an important ratio in North America as well, but certainly quite important in China, used by industry and policymakers indicator on the profitability of the hog industries. They are, of course, the China hog industry face many other challenges as well, in addition to those increasing cost and concern related to that. For example, particularly the challenge associated with the increasing urbanizations. And China is the country which considered to be, because we have the so-called hukou policy, and somehow it has restrictions on how the people, rural people, can move to the cities. And gradually it has been removed and liberalized, but still the hukou system is there. So we typically believe, up to the point right now, the urbanization in China is under-urbanized. So we certainly anticipate a much rapid urbanization in next 10 or 20 years. So in next 10 years, right now, roughly, is 50% of the urbanization rate. So in 10 years, it will be about 60%. So 10% of 1.3 million, that's a lot of new people going to be living in the city. That means there's going to be a lot more demand for the animal products, like meat, like pork. And disease issue. And a lot of analysts certainly believe the rise in pork pricing in China 2007 and 2011 not only related to the rising cost, but it could be very closely related to the disease that time. And another issue related to the food safety incidents, and there are many reports in the media report on that, related to the feed additive and antibiotics and the usage of that, which caused some rising concerns among the consumers. And nevertheless, environmental stress become much more prominent concern associated with the hog productions, and water soil pollution and gas emission, just as the previous speaker has been mentioned. So all those challenges are in play in today's hog industry transformation in China, and play certain roles on that. So what are for this particular conference, one of the issues when I look at that looks like is we look at what type of response which people could use or policymakers could use to deal with the transition, to deal with the transformations. So I'd like to use this opportunity to share with you some of the policy which are adopted in China recently to deal with the situations. Whether that's right policy or wrong policy, that's up to the more rigorous assessment. The policy goal or priority since 2007 in China, number one goal is stability. That's related to the pork security issue. For the policymaker in China, if we can achieve the pork security, we achieve the half of the food security. So that's a very important goal for the top leaders in the country. Second thing, very important, is the industry modernizations. Industrialization, standardization, increasing scale of production. All those issues, particularly the second one, has been mentioned in the previous presentations. Now, what did China do specifically? And China adopted quite aggressive subsidy or industrial subsidy policies to promote the hog industry development. As mentioned in the beginning of my presentation, for the leaders in China, it's particularly important for them to make sure there is adequate pork on the dinner table. So they will do what it takes to make sure that happens, and to make sure they are not relying on the imports to do that. So that's the self-sufficiency issues. So what kind of measure they do? I'm going to go through those lists quickly. For example, 2.5 billion RMB it's going to be spent on increased scale of hog production. A sow subsidy per head is 100 yuan. And subsidized insurance for sow and finished hog. Free mandatory immunizations. Subsidy for quality breeds. Grants for 500 major hog producing counties. And financial awards for large operation. And a subsidy for 300 key breeding farm and centers. And a waiver of 25% corporation income tax. There are many other policies. Subsidized loan and methane digester promotion, disposal of diseased hogs, and granted to encourage returning migrants to get into the big pig farming business. And all those are come together since 2007. So this wide range of policy. Let's come to the earlier point made by Dr. Nippon. We see the transition, we see the transformation. What's the role of government? What's the role of policy? Is that right for the government or policy to intervene? That's certainly an open question. Second type of policy issue, what the government called price alert program. But essentially, it is pork reserve type of policy aimed at reducing the variation in hog price. So introduced in 2009, when they have that price hike and inadequate supply of pork. And basically, they established the National Pork Reserve System and maintained roughly reserve equivalent to 7 days of pork consumption for the pork producing areas. In coastal areas, it's required for 14 days. And then typically what they do is buy up the pork for reserves when prices are low and sell pork when prices are high. So nothing magic. That's the typical commodity trading golden rules. And they use the movement in hog and corn price ratio as a key indicator to trigger the purchase and sale of the pork reserves. And so this is the national policy since 2009. Unfortunately, we don't really have much data on when the sales occur and how much occurred and so on. But definitely, government has intervention guidelines. As I mentioned, they're based on the hog-corn ratios. And typically, 6:1 and 9:1 is considered to be the green area, the normal ratio range. And if it's over 9:1, then they will sell the frozen pork reserve to the market, issue subsidy to low-income consumers. And if it's really below, for example, if we reach the blue indicator, it's 5.5 to 1 to 6:1, and then they will add to central and local pork reserve, and when in this particular range for 4 consecutive weeks. And when the ratio is in the 5.1 to 5.5 to 1, in the yellow indicator, and they subsidize the interest to the loan to large meat processing company to encourage them to add to the consumer reserve and increase pork processing. And if it goes under the 5:1, it's the red. And so they increase the central reserve, require large and medium city to increase the local reserve of frozen pork when the particular ratio is in this particular range for 4 consecutive weeks. So this is the policy, 2 broadly policy in the place. So what are the major changes which we actually observe in China? I will mention number 1. Certainly it's a very significant regional shift of hog production. And the hog production used to be mainly in the Yangtze River area, southeast, south of China. But now, more and more, it's moved to the north of China. And for example, if I look at the numbers, in north of China, in 1980, 7%. But now, I'm sorry, it's 13%, but now it's 19%. And for Yangtze River, in 1980, it's 54%, but now it's 41%. So we sense this regional shifting, which are quite significant. We see the shifting move towards more grain sufficient or producing areas in China. Another major transition or transformation which are occurring, certainly the declining backyard hog farm. I come back to this diagram. This is roughly the share of hogs slaughtered by farm size from 2002 to 2010. As you can say, for the farmer, in the size from 1 to 40 head, in terms of number of slaughters, it's in terms of percentage, it dropped from 2002 73% to 34%, and 50 and above increased from 27 to 66%. So that's dramatic change. And particularly in Sichuan, that's the largest pig producing province. And we sense the same stories. There's big declining in the backyard farmings and increase in the specialized household. For example, if you look at the second row here, it's the so-called specialized household increased from 3% to 25% from the 1985 to the year 2005. So that's, again, dramatic change. And you look at the larger commercial farmers, it's increased from 1985 from 2% to 5%. Actually, it's much less than what I initially anticipated. And another phenomenon associated with that, this rapid increase in the exit from pig farmings. And I used the survey we recently did in Sichuan for my insurance experiment study with the International Labor Organization. And we did a randomized survey of pig raising activity in Zhizhong of Sichuan, which a county raised more than 1.5 million pigs, a county. And in those 18 villages, 3 townships. In 2010, there were 1,684 households raising pig. But in 2011, 1 year later, when we go back to do our experiment, it's only 1,146 households raising pig. So it's a drop of 32%, only 1 year. Okay, so this is a dramatic drop in terms of number of farmers in the pig farmings. And MOA also monitoring the situation, and they anticipate the continuous trend in 2012 in China. So what's the cause of that? Migration, rising cost, price affordability, and the disease are the reasons people mention. So now I want to come back to these figures which I just showed quickly. So this is more visualized, which take a longer time span. It's from 1985 to 2007. So this red line is the declining backyard production. That green line is the increase in the specialized household production. And that blue line is the large-scale commercial production. But of course, one note of caution, we have to be careful what's the definition of that. Okay? And I'll come back to that a little bit later on. But of course, this is quite a dramatic change, as we can say. And then the question for us certainly will be, in China, you see more integrated operation. And there are large pork companies in China now integrated. They try to develop pork value chain, hog value chain, and it's integrated from the feed to the consumer tables. And I'm not going to do one by one, but those 8 companies are the current largest companies in the pork processing sectors. And in China, there's new development. The internet company, the other company has nothing to do with the pork before, now invest hugely in the pork industry. I'm not surprised. You give the high demand in China, you give the huge gap between the international price and domestic hog price in China. There's huge profitability potential there. And that's why this huge amount of investment flood into the hog industry. So in the next 5 years, you will see even more rationalization, more rapid industrialization, and more exit of the small farmers from the pig farmings. And this is the different models. I'm not going to go to the detail and how the company linked with the farmers. And that's certainly the way to deal with the situation, how to link the small farmers in the marketplace. And for China, again, and to ensure the adequate supply, now they say that the key thing is to increase the scale of our production. So in 2010, the Ministry of Agriculture issued the policy documents which encourage the scaling up of hog production. So what did their policy go? It's to increase the scale of hog farming by 10 to 15% from 2010 to 2015. So about 3 years. That's a huge amount of increase, right? And transforming 50% of the scale operation into standardized scale hog farming. So there's a lot, I know there's a lot of different definition comes in here, but that's roughly the idea where the policy goes. Okay. I have 2 minutes? No? Okay. I will wrap up that in 1 or 2 minutes. So I'm going to skip the insurance story. Okay? So implication for the smallholders, as I mentioned quickly, and really we talk a lot on the smallholders this, for the previous session and so on. But sometimes we really don't have a good understanding what is really a smallholder is. What do we mean by that? So in my calculation, well, for the farmer, we say, okay, let's 50 head per slaughter is small, is backyard. If 50 to 500, we can call that a specialized hog farming. And if it's over 500, it's industrial hog farming. I don't even consider that's necessarily the best categorization. But as a debate, I think we have to make sure we have a clear guideline or indicator on that before we move on to the policy indications or policy implications. So the question we will ask certainly, and in China in particular, because government policies encourage the large-scale commercial pig farmings. So question for us to ask is whether or not large-scale farming going to be a dominant source very soon, just like in the United States. It's certainly moving towards that direction, but how soon that's going to happen? And we look at the basic numbers. Certainly we can see how important in China even, the specialized hog farm household. So we were thinking the more probably attention, policy attention needed to be paid to those specialized farm household operations. So let's come to my last slides. The important for the policy is managing the transformation. Certainly it's important that we deal that from hog industry perspective and also dealing with the livelihood perspective. I'm not going to touch the second one. That's what Dr. Hanning has mentioned. We needed to look at a social protection, social policy to deal with the migration, social protection, and so on. But however, in managing the transformation, I think policy attention needs to pay what kind of support we really can help the backyard farmer to move into a specialized farm household. What type of policy we can do to that? A number of them we may extending needed advisory service to backyard farmers and developing integrated risk management tool to small backyard farmers and alleviated the cash flow burden caused by purchase of all those inputs and promoting the superior or quality breeds in the pig production. And in the long run, we need to pursue a more equitable, sustainable path in the long runs. And we have to assessing the full cost of industrial hog production. We have to manage the trade more effectively. Do we need to look at a trade? Can we use the more imports, right, of the pork to address some of the challenge China has? And also creating the fair market environment. And as the market becomes more integrated, whether the small farmer or a small player will be treated fairly, it's become policy issues. So with that, I'd like to conclude my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.